I never thought standing up for myself would cost me my job. After months of enduring subtle comments, uncomfortable glances, and inappropriate remarks from my manager, I finally decided to report his behavior. I followed the proper channels, filed my complaint, and hoped HR would take action. But instead of support, I was met with silence. 2 weeks later, I was called into a meeting, no warning, no explanation, and handed my termination letter. My world flipped. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious. What they didn't know was that I had already spoken to someone who knew exactly what to do next, my lawyer. The days leading up to my dismissal had been filled with tension. After I filed the harassment report, there was a heavy shift in the atmosphere at work. Colleagues who once greeted me warmly now avoided eye contact, and my manager, the very man I had reported, acted bolder than ever, smug, almost taunting. He began micromanaging my tasks, questioning every decision I made, and even assigned impossible deadlines. It was clear that retaliation was in play, but I documented everything. I wasn't going to go down without proof. I worked at this company for nearly 6 years. I had built a solid reputation, respected by clients, trusted by teammates, and often chosen to lead key projects. So when the harassment started, I didn't want to believe it at first. It began subtly, compliments that went too far, personal questions that felt intrusive, and comments about my appearance disguised as jokes. But over time, it escalated, touches on the shoulder that lingered too long, unsolicited late-night messages, and invitations to private dinners under the guise of discussing work. I said no each time, politely but firmly. Still, he persisted. When I finally reported him, it wasn't out of impulse. I had collected screenshots, saved voicemails, and written detailed accounts of incidents with dates and times. I submitted everything to HR, hoping they would conduct a proper investigation. But they dragged their feet. Weeks went by with no word. Meanwhile, my manager seemed to grow more confident, like he knew nothing would touch him. Then came the morning I was called into HR. They said there had been multiple performance concerns and cited vague reasons like lack of team synergy and incompatibility with company culture. I sat there stunned, listening to them list off carefully worded phrases that had nothing to do with reality. I asked if my harassment complaint had been reviewed. They avoided the question. That's when I realized they weren't going to protect me. They were going to protect him. I walked out of that room feeling hollow. My face burned with humiliation as I cleared my desk. Coworkers glanced at me with a mix of sympathy and confusion. No one said a word. I didn't cry. Not yet. I held it together until I stepped into the elevator. And even then, it wasn't sadness, it was rage. Pure, quiet rage. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't alone. The day after filing my complaint, I had consulted a lawyer who specialized in workplace harassment and wrongful termination. She had seen cases like mine before, too many, in fact. She reviewed my documentation, helped me record every retaliatory move, and coached me on what to notice to my lawyer. Over the next few weeks, things began to unfold behind the scenes. My lawyer drafted a formal letter to the company outlining the unlawful termination and citing the legal protection I had under whistleblower and anti-retaliation laws. She demanded access to the internal investigation files, and when they refused, she filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EOC. Suddenly, the silence from HR turned into panic. I started receiving calls from a neutral mediator hired by the company, offering to settle things amicably. My lawyer advised me not to respond directly. She knew their tactics, offering quick money in exchange for silence. But we weren't looking for hush money. We were looking for accountability. Around the same time, the situation took an unexpected turn. One of our largest clients, an international account I had personally managed for 3 years, reached out. The client's lead representative, a sharp and principled woman I had built a strong rapport with, called me privately. "I heard what happened," she said. "Your manager sent someone new to replace you. The way he spoke about it, it didn't sit right." I did some digging. Apparently, the new account manager stumbled during their first client meeting, making excuses and offering weak pitches. The client grew suspicious and asked around internally. That's when they discovered the circumstances of my termination. What the company hadn't realized was that this client had a zero-tolerance policy for workplace harassment. They were more than just a contract, they were the company's biggest source of revenue. And now, they were furious. The client formally requested a meeting with the company's senior leadership. My former manager, unaware of the storm brewing, walked into that meeting expecting to secure a new annual contract. Instead, he found the client armed with documents, some of which I had shared with her during our call. She laid them on the table and said, "If this is how you treat your own employees, we don't want to be associated with your company." According to my lawyer, the internal response was instant chaos. The board demanded an emergency meeting. HR scrambled to review the file they had ignored. And the manager? Well, he wasn't smirking anymore. The boardroom was full that morning, every seat taken, every face grim. The air was tense, tight like a string pulled to its limit, ready to snap. My former manager sat at the far end of the long oak table, shoulders tense but trying to maintain his usual smug confidence. He adjusted his tie twice, then gave a weak smile as if to say, "This is all just a misunderstanding." But the board wasn't smiling back. The CEO sat silently at the head of the table, a thick manila folder in front of him. Inside it were the documents provided by my lawyer, the screenshots, timestamps, written complaints, everything I had submitted to HR and everything they had ignored. Next to it lay another folder, handed to him the day before by our biggest client. It contained a termination letter, not for me, but for their contract. They were pulling out. The client was gone. Millions in annual revenue, gone. The CEO opened the meeting with a quiet but cutting line, "We have a situation." The room remained silent as he detailed the client's decision to sever ties, reading aloud a few choice sentences from their letter. "We cannot, in good conscience, align our company with an organization that retaliates against whistleblowers, and your failure to act has created not only a legal liability but a reputational one." The manager shifted uncomfortably, but tried to defend himself. "It's all exaggerated. She misinterpreted a few jokes. HR found no wrongdoing." "That's not what HR's own documents say," interrupted a board member, flipping through one of the reports. "They didn't investigate at all. They barely acknowledged her complaint before firing her." "She was creating disruption," he blurted. "Spreading negativity, undermining leadership." "You mean, she was calling out illegal behavior?" another executive snapped. "You think it's acceptable to fire an employee after they report harassment, especially with the kind of documentation she had? And then lie about it to our top client?" There was a murmur of agreement. The tide had turned. This wasn't a matter of opinion anymore, it was a matter of fact. I wasn't in the room, but my presence was everywhere. In the evidence. In the silence. In the loss. Another board member leaned forward. "Why didn't you disclose this to us sooner?" He had no answer. The CEO closed the folder in front of him with a slow, deliberate motion. You were warned about this. HR was warned. We have legal exposure now. We're already under EEOC investigation, and the media is sniffing around. We've been contacted by 2 employment rights groups since this morning. Still, the manager pushed. So what, you're taking her word over mine? Over years of management experience? No, said the CEO calmly. We're taking the client's word. And the documents. And the lawyer she hired who's already filed with the labor board. Your word doesn't outweigh all of that. There was a long pause. The kind of pause that comes right before something final. You're being terminated, effective immediately, the CEO said at last. And you'll be escorted from the premises by security. The manager froze, eyes wide. You're firing me? Over this? No, someone corrected. We're firing you because you broke the law, endangered our reputation, cost us a multi-million-dollar client, and put us at the center of a scandal we never asked for. And just like that, it was over. His bravado shattered. No more smirks. No more power. But while his firing felt like justice, it wasn't the end. That same day, my lawyer received an official notice from the company's legal department requesting to open a dialogue. It was a carefully worded way of saying they wanted to settle before this went public. They knew the lawsuit had merit. They knew their negligence had caused real harm. And they knew that once the press caught wind of a wrongful termination following a harassment report, with evidence, they'd face more than just financial damage. My lawyer negotiated the terms while I watched from the sideline, equal parts exhausted and relieved. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about being heard. Being seen. Being vindicated. The settlement they offered included a financial payout large enough to cover everything I had lost, and then some. But more importantly, it required them to issue a formal statement acknowledging that my termination was unjust and promising reforms within HR. My lawyer made it clear, you don't just get to pay to erase what happened. A few weeks later, the statement was published on the company's internal site and quietly shared with our former client. It outlined new training protocols, a restructuring of HR leadership, and an external audit of past complaints. My name wasn't mentioned, but I didn't need it to be. Everyone inside knew what had happened. And who had stood up. It felt surreal. One day I was being escorted out of a job I had once loved, feeling like I had lost everything. The next, I had reclaimed my voice and helped force a change. I thought about all the others who might have stayed silent. Who still were silent. I thought about how close I came to giving up. But I didn't. And that made all the difference. In the weeks that followed the settlement, I found myself in an unfamiliar position, free, but unsettled. There was no more early morning commute, no endless meetings, no fake smiles in the hallway, or careful avoidance of someone who made my skin crawl. And yet, there was no celebration either. My win, if I could call it that, came at a cost. My career was interrupted, my reputation briefly tarnished, and emotionally, I was worn thin. But I knew something fundamental had changed, not just in the company, but in me. The silence of my apartment became a strange kind of therapy. I would sit by the window each morning with coffee in hand, watching the world move, processing everything that had happened. I kept thinking about the moment I stood in HR with my lawyer beside me. How the HR rep, once dismissive, had become visibly nervous. She hadn't expected me to come back. She certainly hadn't expected me to return with someone who knew the law inside and out. That memory brought an unexpected sense of empowerment. Not vengeance. Not pride. Just clarity. I had been treated unjustly, and I had refused to disappear quietly. That, in itself, was enough to begin healing. A few former colleagues reached out privately. Some were shocked, others apologetic. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up," one said in a voicemail. "I saw how he treated you, and I should have said something." Another wrote, "You were the only one with the courage to push back. Everyone else was scared." I didn't blame them. I knew how deep the fear ran, the fear of losing a paycheck, being blacklisted, labeled difficult. But their words affirmed what I already sensed: my story had sparked something. Whispers in the break rooms. Nervous glances in HR. A slow but unmistakable shift in culture. About a month later, I was invited to speak on a panel hosted by a local women in business organization. The topic? Standing up in silence, reporting workplace harassment. I hesitated at first. Was I ready to relive all of it publicly? But then I thought of how many times I had wished someone had stood on a stage like that when I needed them. So I agreed. The event was held at a modest auditorium, with maybe 50 attendees, mostly women, some men, all professionals. I sat among the panelists, lawyers, advocates, a journalist, and when my turn came, I stood and told my story. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I just laid it out: what happened, how I was treated, how the company failed me, and how I chose to fight back. When I finished, there was a pause, like people were holding their breath. Then, one by one, they clapped. A slow, rising round of applause that carried more weight than I expected. It was as if they were saying, "Thank you for not letting them bury you. Thank you for reminding us we don't have to accept this." Afterward, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 24, nervous and fidgeting. "I'm in a situation like yours," she said. "I've been documenting everything. I didn't know if it was worth speaking up. But now, I think I have to." I gave her my lawyer's card. "You're not alone," I told her. "And you deserve to be safe where you work." The weeks turned into months. My case had been resolved, but the ripple effect continued. The company was now under routine audits. Several managers had resigned quietly. HR underwent restructuring, and a new policy was introduced requiring third-party investigations of all harassment claims. I learned through back channels that my former manager had not only been fired, but disqualified from holding a leadership role at any partner company. But what surprised me most was when I got a call from someone I least expected, the CEO. "I know we didn't speak directly during all of this," he began, cautiously. "But I wanted to say, you were right. We failed you. And I let that happen under my watch." His voice carried no arrogance, only regret. "We've begun working with an outside firm to rebuild trust internally. And I'd like to ask if you'd consider consulting with us on improving our internal protocols." I was stunned. Part of me didn't trust it. Was it a PR move? A way to clean up the mess? But another part of me recognized the rare opportunity. Change is never perfect. But real change starts when those in power begin to admit their failures. I took a breath. "I'll think about it." That night, I sat down and opened a blank document on my laptop. Not a legal file, not a report, just thoughts. What would a better system look like? What would it mean for someone like me to walk into HR and actually be heard? I wasn't sure if I would work with them again, but the idea of shaping something better lit a small fire in me. Not long after, I was offered a role at a different firm, one that had followed my story and reached out proactively. They weren't perfect, but their leadership was transparent. They had policies in place, and more importantly, they listened. In my new office, with my name on the door and respect in the air, I realized something powerful. I hadn't just survived this ordeal, I had reshaped my future because of it. Looking back now, I realized that what felt like the worst moment of my professional life was actually the beginning of a profound transformation, not just for me, but for the people who watched my journey unfold. Being fired after reporting harassment could have broken me. It could have sent me into silence, shame, or bitterness. But instead, it woke something up inside me that I hadn't truly acknowledged before: resilience. I used to believe that success meant climbing the ladder quietly, never making waves, staying agreeable. But silence protects predators, not victims. And when the system failed me, I did something I once thought impossible. I stood up and forced it to see me. I forced it to hear me. And by doing that, I helped change it. The settlement was never about the money. It was about accountability. It was about reclaiming the voice they tried to strip from me. And the impact didn't end with that courtroom handshake. I've received messages from women and men who said my story gave them the courage to come forward. A junior employee told me she had printed out part of my panel speech and taped it inside her notebook as a reminder that she could speak up, too. In my new role, I advocate not only for ethical leadership but for a culture of transparency and justice. I work with HR teams to create real reporting systems, train management on active listening, and advise boards on preventing toxic environments before they begin. My voice, once ignored, now builds systems meant to protect the next person. Pain shaped me, but purpose rebuilt me. And as for the company that fired me, they may never publicly admit what they allowed to happen. But every policy change, every resignation, every audit is proof that one person speaking out can cause an earthquake in the right place. I lost a job. But I gained something far more powerful: the chance to be the change I once needed.